Today I finished one more book, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful book. It's interesting because a couple of years ago I tried to listen to this book, and for some reason I was just not able to really listen, not able to really understand. Maybe I just didn't suffer enough back then, or maybe just because this book is just really must be read when you have in your hand and be able to really move slowly rather than just listening to a book. And the question is if I were recommend it, 100%. I think that every single person will go through suffering at some point in their life, and being ready to understand what they could do with that suffering, I think is extremely important. So let's get started because I have quite a lot of notes. So what I will do, I will read the quotes from the book, and I potentially share what I learned from it. The first one is, yes, a man can get used to anything, but do not ask how. And at the beginning, of course, he shared all the experiences in the camp, and people got used to the worst things in life, seeing the worst terrible things. And isn't I think that sometimes we need to understand that will get used to. Sometimes we live too comfortable, and we get used to comfort because you get used to comfort is not good as well. Because if you get used to comfort, that means that you will not pursue the things that actually matters in life. An abnormal reaction to abnormal situation is normal behavior. I just really love this sentence. An abnormal reaction to abnormal situation is a normal behavior. You have no idea how you will react to abnormal situation. Sometimes challenge yourself and really putting yourself in extreme situations that you never put yourself in is really allowing you to know yourself a little bit better because now you know exactly how you react into abnormal situations. Because if you never experienced abnormal situation, you have no idea how you would react because that abnormal reaction is a normal reaction because you never have experienced that. Disgust, horror, and pity are emotions that our spectator could not really feel anymore. The sufferers, the dying, and the dead became such a commonplace sights to him after a few weeks of camp life that they could not move him anymore. So you shared that at the beginning, when you came to the camp, you have disgust and horror and pity, but after a couple of weeks, you don't have those anymore because it's just such a commonplace. So what becomes common, and even the worst things, when it becomes common, you start to tolerate and not look anymore, and not move him anymore. At such a moment in this, it is not the physical pain which hurts the most, and this applies to adults as much as punished children. It is the mental agony caused by the injustice, the unreasonableness of it all. So the biggest pain was not physical that they needed to go through in the camp, but really understanding how much unfairness is that they going through this camp and they are hurt for basically no other reason just as being born in a certain way as a Jew. What did the prisoner dream about most frequently? What did the prisoner dream about most frequently? Of bread, cake, cigarettes, and nice warm bath. It's interesting that, and again, this is Maslow's hierarchy, that when your survival is at stake, the only thing that you can really dream about is actually food. They're small things. And that is so dangerous when you think about what you're dreaming about. You can really be a sign for you. Okay, what do I dream about? If you think about food, if you dream about something safety, maybe it's time to really look into how what you're able to do with the foundation. Because sometimes I think that people at last they want to self-actualize themselves, but that is not helping them because the first foundation is not covered yet. Subhuman existence, which had made us unable to think of anything other than food. So exactly this. Subhuman existence, which had made us unable to think of anything other than food. Sensitive people who were used to a rich intellectual life may have suffered much pain. They were often of a delicate constitution, but the damage to their inner selves was less. They were able to retreat from their terrible surroundings to a life of inner riches and spiritual freedom. And that's extremely important to develop inner strength because no matter what's going on outside, you're able to really, I love retreat from their terrible surroundings to a life of inner riches. That's why we need to develop not just outer riches, but the most important part, we need to develop inner riches and spiritual freedom. The truth that love is the ultimate and the highest goal to which man can aspire. The salvation of man is through love and in love. It's a beautiful thing. I think that love is a beautiful thing. Love in your calling, love in relationships, in love of yourself. I think love is a beautiful word and it's supposed to be every single day. In a position of utter dissolution, when man cannot express himself in a positive action, when his only achievement may consist in enduring his sufferings in the right way, an honorable way, in such a position man can, through loving contemplation of the image he cares of his beloved, achieve fulfillment. So that means that the person who is going through terrible, terrible places, he's able to really go through it in an honorable way when they have someone that they love in their mind. Humor was another of the weapons in the fight for self preservation. Humor was another weapon. So knowing that humor is extremely important, and it doesn't matter how terrible you are, you deserve to have humor because sometimes when we are in a terrible station, we sometimes believe that we're supposed to be always maybe negative. But I think that's a beautiful thing when you're able to look at, I need to be humorous in this place, in this situation, so I could have better chance of surviving and moving through this terrible situation. Okay, in a certain quantity of gas, oh, this is a very great analogy. If a certain quantity of gas is pumped into empty chamber, it will fill the chamber completely and evenly, no matter how big the chamber. Thus suffering completely fills the human soul and conscious mind, what no matter what the suffering is great or little. Therefore, the size of human suffering is absolutely relative. It also follows that a very trifling thing, small thing, can cause the greatest joys. It's a beautiful thing. That's why I was always thinking that every single person's suffering is seems like the biggest for that person because suffering fills your soul or mind, all your mind. So it doesn't matter what the size is, which will fill your soul, that suffering. And it doesn't matter how big it is, it will be filled with suffering or joy by itself. The experiences of camp life show that man does have a choice of action. Man can preserve a vestige of spiritual freedom, of independence of mind, even in such terrible conditions of psychic and spiritual stress. And will be a longer paragraph that I really love the whole thing. We, man, yeah. We who lived in concentration camps can remember the man who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in numbers, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human's freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And there were always a choice to make. Every day, every hour offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to those powers which threatened to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom, which determined whether or not you would become the plaything of circumstance, renouncing freedom and dignity to become molded into the form of the typical inmate. I hope you see that even now I have goosebumps to understand how powerful this paragraph is. They went through massive challenges, but there were people who never gave up their dignity and freedom, and they renounced their freedom and did what's right in their spirit. In the final analysis, it becomes clear that the source of a person of the sort of a person the prisoner become was the result of inner decision and not the result of camp influence alone. Fundamentally, therefore, any man can, even under such circumstances, decide what shall become of him, mentally and spiritually. It's a beautiful thing. It is a spiritual freedom which cannot be taken away that makes life meaningful and purposeful. I will read it one more time because I think that this is just a very good summary. It is this spiritual freedom which cannot be taken away that makes life meaningful and purposeful. Spiritual freedom is never could be taken, no matter what it is. An active life serves the purpose of giving man the opportunity to realize values in creative work, while passive life of enjoyment affords him the opportunity to obtain fulfillment in experiencing beauty, art, or nature. But there is also purpose in that life which but admits of but one possibility of high moral behavior, namely in man's attitude to his existence, an existence restricted by external forces. And she shares that there's two types of purpose. It could be adapted to creative work, it could be to art and beauty, or it could be existence restricted by external forces. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete. That's only one sentence, but I think is a beautiful. The way in which a man accepts his fate and all the suffering in it entails, the way in which he takes up his cross gives him ample opportunity, even under most difficult circumstances, to add a deeper meaning to his life. It may remain brave, dignified, and unselfish. Ample opportunity, even under the most difficult circumstances, add deeper meaning into his life. And there's a lot of things I think that is it's worth repeating. That it doesn't matter what circumstance you have, there is still able to find the meaning of life. The tendency there was to look into the past to help make the present, with all its horrors, less real. But in robbing the present of its reality, there lay a certain danger. It became easy to overlook the opportunities to make something positive of camp life, opportunities which really did exist. And this is such a powerful lesson just in for us as well that never been in a camp, but when you're going through suffering at the moment, right now, when you look into and really reflect on the past experience, and maybe it's even beautiful experience in the past, and reflecting on the past, while you reflect on the past, it might be leaving opportunities on the table. There's a beautiful opportunities to really make things happen, but you're leaving them because you're reflecting on the past. So rather than reflecting the past, looking in the present, say, what do I have? What kind of opportunities do I have right now to really move my life forward? Emotion, which is suffering, ceases to be suffering as soon as they form a clear and precise picture of it. Just reflecting and being aware of it, that gives you freedom. The prisoner who had lost faith in the future, his future was doomed. Those who know how close the connection is between the state of mind of a man, his courage and hope, or lack of them, and the state of immunity of his body will understand that the sudden loss of hope and courage can have a deadly effect. And he shared experience that people who lost hope and courage used to die very, very soon because the immunity was extremely low. And even through a massive difficulties, of course, in the winter working, and that's what had a deadly effect. As I said before, any attempt to restore a man's inner strength in the camp had first to succeed in showing him some future goal. That's why, like, when sometimes you need to look into how future will look differently, and being able to see the future is extremely important. We had to learn ourselves, and furthermore, we had to teach the despairing men that it did not really matter what we expect from life, but rather what life expected from us. I never had that idea that we're not supposed to ask what I expect from life, but asking what life expects from me. That's a beautiful question. And I even needed to reflect even more, but like what life expects from me. I think it's a beautiful thing. When you start asking it, what life expects of me. Life expects of me being courageous, expects of me to really live by morals, by some values. And I think it gives much more strength than what you expect from life. Only slowly could these men be guided back to the commonplace through truth that no one has a right to do wrong, not even if wrong has been done to them. It's interesting because after they was released, some people want to do terrible things for the people who actually did wrong for them, but they need to go back to commonplace and truth that you're not supposed to do wrong, even though that you have been wronged. And this is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, and it's a healing thing to do. But the meaning of life differ from man to man, from day to day, and from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning on person's life at any given moment. At life at any given moment. So that means that the meaning of life might change and most likely will change when your life changes. When external things changes, it might be that your meaning will change. So that keeping that meaning of life, something that's always the same, could not work. In some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning, such a meaning of a sacrifice. I know that one of my best friends said he said this was his favorite quote, and that's why I read it again. In some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. So when you understand it, like what is behind this meaning, I remember that even he shared an example that a person, a doctor, lost his wife, and he was suffering tremendously for a couple of years, and he was not able to deal with the loss of his wife. And he went and met Frankl, and he said that I don't know what to do. And he said that how would your wife would feel if you would die first? And he said that she would suffer probably the same way as I am. And he said that that means that you saved her from his suffering by outliving your wife. And that thought that he saved his wife from suffering allowed him to look in his suffering with the meaning of it. And that's a beautiful thing. Man's main concern is not to gain pleasure or avoid pain, but rather to see a meaning in his life. That is why man is even ready to suffer on the condition to be sure that his suffering has a meaning. But let me make it perfectly clear that in no way is suffering necessary to find meaning. I only insist that meaning is possible even in spite of suffering, provided certainly that the suffering is unavoidable. That means that he should start share in the past and later as well as suffering, even though that seems great sometimes now after reading book gives so much benefits, but if it's avoidable we need to avoid it, and if it is not avoidable we start to see that meaning could be found even despite the suffering that you're going through. Man is not fully conditioned and determined, but rather determines himself, whether he gives it to conditions or stands up to them. In other words, man is ultimately self-determined. And it's something that this lesson is extremely important to always remember. Man is ultimately self-determined. I think that of course sometimes it can be that culture is determining me, my family is determining me. Like there's so many things that could determine the things that we do, and that could be an excuse to actually not to choose and make decision to determine yourself by yourself. Life is potentially meaningful under any conditions, even those which are most miserable. And this, in turn, presupposes the human capacity creatively turn life's negative aspects into something positive and constructive. In other words, what matters is to make the best of any given situation. And this is extremely important. What matters is to make the best of any given situation. That's how what life truly means. People have enough to live by, but nothing to live for. They have the means, but no meaning. But to be sure, some do not even have the means. The next quote is, but in the first place, you have to live to see the day on which it may happen. So you have to survive in order to see that day dawn. And from now on, the responsibility for survival does not leave you. I think it's extremely important to understand that people sometimes are suicidal and they think about the future that it could never happen. But it's like, if that will happen, it might happen, it will happen. You need your main responsibility is to survive until that day, because I think that when a person is actually in a terrible spot mentally, they eat terrible, they don't sleep, they don't exercise, and for them to survive till that day when they will start to see the results of their action, and and things change, because things shall pass and will pass, as a same important responsibility to survive till that day. The next quote is just a little bit longer paragraph. Is this: as logotherapy teaches, there are three main avenues on which one arrives at meaning in life. The first is by creating a work or doing the deed. The second is by experiencing something or encountering something. In other words, meaning can be found not only in work but also in love. And most important, however, is the third avenue to meaning in life. Even the helpless victim of a hopeless situation may grow beyond himself and by so doing change himself. He may turn a personal tragedy into a triumph. And I think that is, again, this beautiful thing. When you think about the biggest strategies, there's people, even Alex Ramoy, said that the biggest sufferings of his life was actually the biggest blessings. And I think that's what we as people are able to do to every single tragedy. He's not only unhappy, but also ashamed of being unhappy. So interesting that this is just a one sentence. He is not only unhappy, but also ashamed of being happy. And I think there's a lot of things that can be not only shameful, but also ashamed of being shameful. There's a lot of words that could really, that is anger, but is also ashamed of being angered. I think that's, it's very dangerous to be even sad about the emotion that you have. Jerry Long, I view my life as being abundant with meaning and purpose. The attitude that I adopt on that fateful day has become my personal credo for life. I broke my neck. It didn't broke me. There's a Jerry Long who he fell on his neck, and he broke his neck and of course got paralyzed. But his view in life and his purpose was didn't change it. He mentioned this person on his book because even any circumstances, some people could choose to go above and beyond. Frankl offers readers who are searching for answers to life dilemmas a critical mandate. He does not tell people what to do, but why they must do it. His goal was to provoke people into realizing that they could and should exercise their capacity for choice to achieve their own goals. What then is man? A being that has within it at one and the same time the possibility of sinking to the level of animal or soaring to a life of a near wholeness. This is very important, and I think that I will repeat it one more time. Is it what then is man? A being that has within it at one and the same time the possibility of sinking to the level of an animal or of soaring to a life of near wholeness. And the last and the last sentence, and I think that's beautiful to finish, is that everything that is great is rare to find. and it's difficult to do. I will repeat it one more time. Everything that is great is rare to find and is difficult to do. So suffering, and use suffering as a trump, use strategy as a trump, is difficult to do, but it's great, and that's why we need to choose it. I think that's a beautiful book. I read quite a lot of quotes, and I think that I already see that 25 minutes went by, and it just went very quickly for me because I found that there's a lot of meaning just in reading this book. Because when you reflect on your own suffering, I think that this book is extremely beneficial because it allows to use your suffering for your own good rather than using your suffering to sabotage or using your suffering as a luggage to really carry that heavy luggage to the future, because we need to be able to let that go and sometimes even use as fuel to really benefit our future. So I hope you choose to win and see you tomorrow.